Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into a totally rad era for fashion, the 1980s. We're going way beyond just shoulder pads and neon, though I gotta admit, those were pretty awesome.
You're telling me the 80s were all about big statements.
Totally. We're talking bold looks, big changes happening in society, and some surprising things that influenced style back then.
Absolutely.
So we've got a ton of cool stuff to explore. Think magazines, fashion books, even interviews with the designers and trendsetters who owned the 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We're on a mission to figure out what drove those wild styles and what they tell us about the world then, maybe even about us now. You ready for a blast from the past?
Let's do it. I've always said fashion's like a secret code. It reveals a lot about what we care about.
So true. And one of the biggest messages in 80s fashion was definitely about power. Our sources are bursting with these incredible photos of women rocking power suits, those ones with the strong shoulders and bold colors, especially in the business world. It's like they were dressing to win, you know?
It makes total sense when you think about what was going on. More women than ever were entering the workforce, right? And a lot of them were going into fields that were, well, mostly dominated by men.
Yeah.
Clothes became their secret weapon, a way to show they were just as capable and in charge, even if some people weren't ready to admit it yet.
Like their outfits were speaking for them before they even said a word.
Exactly. It wasn't just about fitting in. It was about standing out, demanding respect.
And nobody rocked that power suit quite like Margaret Thatcher, right? Those sharp jackets and those handbags. One book even called them, get this, weapons of diplomacy.
I love it.
Yeah, they weren't messing around.
And you know what's interesting? For women in those positions, handbags became about way more than just carrying your things.
Yep.
They were a symbol,
right?
Organization, being in control, juggling it all, literally.
So true. It's like they were sending this message of, I've got this, even when the rest of the world wasn't quite sure what to do with powerful women. But we can't forget Princess Diana. Talk about someone who used clothes to tell her story. She really came into her own in the 80s style-wise. Wouldn't you agree?
100%. What fascinates me about Diana is how she used fashion as she evolved.
Yeah.
She went from a softer, more romantic style to those bold colors, those clean lines, and yep, you guessed it, power suits.
Right.
It showed everyone she was becoming more confident, more independent, don't you think?
Absolutely. And she wasn't afraid to experiment. On the one hand, you've got those iconic gowns, and then on the other, she's rocking those effortless casual outfits while she's out there doing charity work. She showed everyone you could be glamorous and down to earth, all through your style.
She truly did. It's like she got the power of fashion, how it could connect with people, and she ran with it. Oh, and speaking of iconic 80s women and power dressing, Joan Collins as Alexis on Dynasty. Can we talk about her? Total boardroom boss.
For sure. Talk about fashion goals. These women were at the top of their game, making bold choices. It must have given so many other women permission to do the same, even if it was just adding a little shoulder pad action to their work outfits.
Right, like, here I am, I'm capable, deal with it. But the 80s weren't all about suits and boardrooms. This is where things get really interesting, because right alongside all that, the lines between what you'd wear to the gym and, well, everywhere else just blurred.
It's true. Leggings, sneakers, tracksuits, everyone was wearing them. It was like the gym became the hottest fashion show in town.
Right. And a lot of it goes back to fitness culture getting huge, that whole aerobics craze. You can't talk 80s fitness without Jane Fonda.
Oh, totally. Those workout videos.
It became cool to sweat, and suddenly your workout clothes were a big deal.
It's like, forget a fancy party. You could wear a neon leotard and leg warmers to the grocery store and be the most stylish one there.
Huh. And the sneakers. They went from being for athletes to, like, these must-have status symbols. This is when Air Jordans hit the scene. Everyone had to have the latest pair.
One article even called it a full-on sneaker war between Nike and Adidas. Everyone wanted in.
And it went beyond just sports, too. Think about hip-hop blowing up in the 80s. Adidas, especially, became a symbol of that street style, thanks to groups like Run DMC, who made those tracksuits and felt to Adidas their signature.
It's like fashion became this awesome blend of sports, music, culture, all mashed up into one big, expressive style. Which, speaking of music, brings us to another huge influence on 80s fashion, because no decade rocked out quite like the 80s.
No argument there.
Yeah.
MTV was basically a 24/7 fashion show back then,
Right.
and everyone was watching. You know, we've talked about power suits, athletic wear, that cool
Yeah.
hip-hop vibe. Did you notice any, I don't know, common threads running through all those 80s styles?
Ooh, that's a good question. Now that you mention it, there was this sense of excess, right? Like more was always more.
Yes.
Our fashion history book called it a reaction to the whole minimalist thing in the 70s, all those earth tones. The 80s were like, crank it up.
Totally. Think about it. Bold prints, those shoulder pads we talked about, even the jewelry. It was all about being seen, being heard.
Oh, and the hair. Don't even get me started. We could do a whole deep dive just on 80s hairstyles.
For real.
But you're right. It wasn't just about size. It's what it meant. Like that big, unapologetic hair, especially for women. It was like they were saying, I'm here, I'm strong, deal with it.
Absolutely. It was about taking up space, pushing back against those old ideas about how women should look, how they should act like they should be smaller, quieter, which I think goes hand in hand with another huge theme in 80s fashion, being yourself.
Yeah.
Even when everyone was wearing a trend like power suits, people found ways to make it their own.
Totally. Speaking of making it your own, we can't talk about 80s fashion without mentioning denim, can we? It was everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we saw pictures of people in head-to-toe denim jackets, jeans, skirts, and somehow they totally pulled it off.
Denim was having its moment.
Yeah.
And it makes sense, right? People wanted to express themselves and be comfortable, be able to move. You could dress denim up, dress it down, customize it with patches, studs, whatever you wanted.
Like a blank canvas for your style. Speaking of blank canvases, our research also mentioned this resurgence of DIY fashion in the 80s. People were getting crafty, adding their own touches to their clothes, giving old pieces a new life.
It's true. And we can't forget, the 80s weren't all sunshine and boom times for everyone. For some, it was about making do with what they had, which honestly often sparked so much creativity. People were expressing themselves through fashion, even if they didn't have a ton of money to spend.
It's like they say, necessity is the mother of invention. I bet some of those pieces have amazing stories behind them. Can you imagine finding a vintage 80s jacket with hand-stitched patches or some old jeans with a custom paint job? So cool.
Right. It's that personal touch that makes it special. And you know what I find interesting? That DIY spirit, that connection to the past.
Yeah.
It's so relevant today. Vintage clothing is huge right now, and 80s fashion is back in a big way.
Totally. Everywhere you look, it's like those 80s vibes are back scrunchies, mom jeans, even those bold shoulders are making a comeback. Who knows, maybe in 30 years, people will be looking back at our skinny jeans the way we look back at parachute pants.
Right. Fashion is funny like that. It goes in cycles. But you know what I find even more interesting than what comes back around? It's how those trends get reinvented, how they mean something different to a new generation.
Totally. Like, I've been seeing these oversized blazers, but they're styled in a more relaxed, less structured way. And those bold 80s prints are back, but instead of head-to-toe neon, it's like one statement piece with a modern outfit.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between the past and now, creating a look that feels like you. And speaking of authentic, there's one more big influence we can't forget when it comes to 80s fashion movies and TV.
Oh, absolutely. Talk about fashion inspiration. Some of those movies were like fashion shows on steroids. I mean, who didn't want to raid Molly Ringwald's closet? Seriously. I mean, some of those movies, they were basically 2 hours of iconic outfit inspiration, like Flashdance. Remember those off-the-shoulder sweatshirts, leg warmers, and those dance shoes?
Oh, yeah.
Our 80s movie fashion book called it the Jennifer Beals effect. It was like instant fashion icon status.
It's amazing how costume design can become this whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
People didn't just want to dance like Jennifer Beals. They wanted to be her. And her clothes were like a big part of that whole vibe.
So true. And it felt attainable, right? Like anyone could rock those looks.
Exactly. You didn't have to spend a ton of money to look that cool, which made it even cooler.
Totally. It's like, hey, I can pull off that awesome confident look too. Speaking of awesome looks, we've got to talk about another 80s movie icon with a style that's still inspiring people today. Molly Ringwald. Pretty in Pink, anyone.
Oh, classic. What I loved about Andy's style was how she owned her individuality, even on a budget.
Right.
She was all about thrifting, mixing vintage pieces with stuff she made herself,
Yeah.
creating something totally unique.
Way ahead of her time. Sustainable fashion, upcycling, vintage shopping. She was rocking it back in the 80s.
She really made it cool to express yourself through clothes no matter how much money you had, which is pretty awesome.
Okay, but get ready for a dressing power trip because we're about to talk working girl. Melanie Griffith's character, Tess McGill. She starts in Staten Island, ends up on Wall Street, and her wardrobe transformation is legendary.
Total 80s power fantasy. She ditches those cozy sweaters and big jewelry for power suits. Shoulder pads that could, like cut diamonds, and earrings that meant business.
It's like her clothes were speaking for her. I belong here, I'm capable, watch out.
And she totally owned it. The costume designer for that film, Anne Roth, she knew exactly what she was doing. Those clothes screamed ambition and confidence.
From dance studios to boardrooms, those 80s movies had every style covered. But we can't forget about the streets, right? And when it comes to capturing that awesome, eclectic vibe of 1980s New York City, no movie does it quite like Desperately Seeking Susan.
Talk about a visual feast. You've got Madonna's bohemian punk style alongside Rosanna Arquette's more polished look. It's like a perfect snapshot of how fashion was all about expressing yourself back then.
Absolutely. Our source on Madonna and her impact on 80s fashion said she single-handedly made lace gloves, layered necklaces, and those crucifix earrings must-haves.
She was always reinventing herself, pushing the boundaries of style. She got that fashion wasn't about blindly following trends. It was about using it to show the world who you are.
It's like she gave everyone permission to experiment, have fun with their look, not be afraid to stand out.
Exactly. It was about being your most authentic self, even if that meant challenging a few norms along the way.
So we've journeyed from power suits to punk rock, from dance floors to the silver screen, and it's clear the 80s were a time of bold statements and totally owning your individuality. What stands out to you as the most impactful part of 80s style?
That's a tough one. But I think the 80s showed everyone that fashion's a powerful way to express yourself. It's about more than just the clothes, right? It's about using them to tell our stories, challenge the status quo, and celebrate what makes us unique. And that's something that still resonates with people today.
I totally agree. It really makes you wonder, what will people be saying about our style in 30 years? Any predictions? What trends will make a comeback?
Well, like we were saying before, fashion is cyclical. What's old is new again. But I think the most interesting question isn't so much what will come back, but how future generations will reinvent those trends and make them their own.
That's what's so cool about fashion. It's this conversation between the past, present, and future. We've gone from shoulder pads to sneakers, from Madonna to working girl, uncovering the why behind those awesome 80s styles and what they tell us about ourselves and the times we live in. Big thanks to you for diving deep with us. Until next time, keep exploring those unique styles and have fun with fashion.